Kevin putting the key in the key return box. Last night was our last night at the cell block.
Indeed. And that's that. So on Tuesday, August 15th, we got up early, left our Airbnb in Wickham and drove over to Port Hedland. Port Hedland has port facilities for FMG, BHP, and Roy Hill. And though we'd been there and shot it pretty extensively in 2011 and 2018, Lon had nenever been there, and Mel and I were kind of itching for a return just because things change in the Pilbara awful fast, and we wanted to see what had changed at Port Hedland. So we got there early and started with BHP and FMG, but BHP at their Buderi facility is a really busy place. They bring single rakes out of the port to Buderi and double them up, run them south from there, and conversely loads come in and they break them in half and run single rakes down into the port facility for unloading. It's a really busy spot, got a highway bridge right next to it where you can watch them shuffle power and bring the trains in and out. Really good spot. And then we got some FMG there at their Thomas Yard. So it was a very good morning at Port Hedland. We also managed to drive down to Finnegan Island and take a look at BHP's unloading facilities there. So got some good stuff in that area while we were there. Port Hedland is always just an amazing place. There's so much going on with those three railroads that there's almost always something moving. After the morning on BHP at Buderi and north of Thomas Yard on FMG, we ate lunch at Red Bank, which is next to the solar salt pans of Dampier Salt, which is 68% owned by Rio Tinto. Red Bank is on the former Hammersley route to Nelson Point, while Buderi is on the former Goldsworthy line that leads to Finnegan Island. And then with our ultimate goal being Auski Roadhouse, we drove south, spent some time at Woodstock, where FMG crosses over BHP, and landed in Auski about 6:30 in the evening to get checked in. And Auski Roadhouse is really a wonderful place. I got great memories there. Time to get to the end of the cut at Woodstock. This was once a road.
There's no doubt about that. We were here. The question is now where to stop.
Maybe we ought to check here. There's no place to stop and not get out in this bit of things. Looking at the expansion of the railroads in the Pilbara, from the original 4 railroads to the massive trackage that we have today, we'll start with the BHP side of thing, which was Goldsworthy Mining and Mount Newman Mining. Those were both owned by BHP, which became BHP Minerals in 1990 and BHP Billiton in 2001. The original line came down here to Newman, and the first expansion was over to the Jimble Bar Hub and Ore Body 24, adding those 2 new routes. Those happened in 1989. Then it expanded on from the Port Hedland to Newman main line at Yandy Junction over to the Yandy 1 and the Yandy 2 mines, and a couple of years later in 1992. Then about a decade later, they expanded again, this time going down to MAC, which is an acronym for Mining Area C. So they got to MAC in 2003. And then in rare contraction, they embargoed the Yari line, shut down the mine at Yari, and quit running trains on that in 2014. Then in recent times, BHP added the South Flank extension from MAC, and that was added in May 2021. One other project worth mentioning on BHP is a mainline project where they put in a duplication, a new line between Shaw and Cowra to give a lower grade line for northbound loads. That was open for traffic on April 7th, 2011. So that's a summary of what's happened with BHP. Meanwhile, Hammersley Iron and Robe River became part of Rio Tinto. And Rio Tinto had 2 operating entities, with one, Pilbara Rail, being folded into the other, Pilbara Iron, in 2005. Hammersley Iron started with a route between the port of Dampier near Karratha and Mount Tom Price, which is right down here, and that opened in 1966. And then they extended that to Paraburdoo in 1972. Once Hammersley got to Paraburdoo in 1972, the next expansion project was west from Rosella over to Brockman 2, which they reached in 1992, added a mine at Namaldi in 2006, and then built to Brockman 4 in 2010. So that's that leg of what is now Rio Tinto. 2 years later, another line was built east from Rosella to Marandu, which opened in 1994, and then that was extended to Yandy Kogina in 1998. Then there was another line that branches off the Yandy Kogina line at Chuna Downs, ran south to West Angeles, which opened in 2002, then built an extension to Hope Downs, which opened in 2007, and then Hope Downs 4 in 2014. So that's that whole leg of Rio Tinto. And then a new line, which opened on June 21st, 2020, leaves the Hammersley Iron main line just south of Lyre at what is now called Cootaderi Junction, runs east and crosses the FMG Solomon line, reaching Cootaderi clear down here. It's interesting how these railroads are reaching different points and crossing each other different times, and it all has to do with the tenants or mining rights that they own in the Pilbara. So they'll own a mining right in a particular area, and then they have to figure out how to get a railroad built into there. And then on the Robe River side of things, the line from Cape Lambert to Deepdale expanded just marginally, basically just into different mining areas, all pretty much right there. So not a lot of expansion on the Deepdale line of Robe River. Then we have a new railroad, FMG, Fortescue Metals Group, which was founded in 2003. And it runs from Port Hedland originally down to Cloudbreak, which was opened in 2008. And then extended to Christmas Creek a year later in 2009. And then in 2012, they opened the Solomon branch. They call it the Solomon Spur. Anything but a spur. It's obviously a heavy-duty main line. It leaves at the main line at Nuna, runs over to the Solomon Hub, which has 3 or 4 mines, all operating out of one major loadout there at the Solomon Hub. And then they pushed the Solomon Hub further west in 2020, opening a line which ran over here to Elawana, the new Elawana extension. So that's FMG's empire in the Pilbara. And then finally, the newest railroad in the Pilbara is Roy Hill, which operates from Port Hedland down to the mine at Roy Hill. And that was opened on November 22nd, 2015, the newest player in the Pilbara. On Wednesday, August 16th, we were up at 6 a.m. and headed for FMG, which was our main target of the day. But on our way over to FMG, we stumbled across a Rio Tinto train loading at the loadout on the Cootaderi extension, right at the Cootaderi mine. So we nabbed that and then proceeded on over to FMG. And as we were driving down the FMG main line, we spotted a northbound Roy Hill train. And it was set to go into the siding at POSCO, so we knew we had a southbound coming at us. So that gave us an opportunity to shoot a Roy Hill train we hadn't planned on. And then we headed to FMG and worked our way down towards Cloudbreak, with our main target being to eventually get to Christmas Creek. We drove down FMG and nabbed the first train at Morgan and came across another challenging part of this particular trip. We caught the head end and turned around and ran the gravel road as fast as we could for about 15 minutes before we finally caught back up to the head end. They were just really flying, which was a little disappointing because this was an area in 2018 and that had been really fun, where they ran slow, pulling on the grade out of Cloudbreak. And after that, we drove down to the loadout at Christmas Creek, which was one of our goals. We called this trip the Out to the Ends trip because Mel and I had shot in previous years much of the territory from the middle part of the Pilbara up north to the ports. So we had good coverage of that, and we really wanted coverage out where the mines are towards the ends of things. So with that in mind, we went down to Christmas Creek, and there was a train loading at the loadout when we got there. So we had an opportunity to eat lunch and then gave chase to the northbound. And so we chased the northbound back to Jones, jumped out for a shot there, and we had our first real equipment disaster of the trip. Mel slipped, and though he didn't fall and hurt himself, he lost his camera and it hit the ground and damaged both the camera and the lens. So that put him down a set of equipment. He had a spare camera, but he didn't have a spare lens. Fortunately, I had a spare lens. So we put my lens on his body, and really he was just down a body from that point on, which was a little detrimental because he didn't have quick access to his big lens. He had to change lenses instead of having a body already set for it. So that was a bit of a disadvantage from there on out. Speaking of equipment problems, I'd already had some. I lost a GPS unit off my main camera body in Karratha, and so I didn't have geotagging available, which is really handy for knowing where you are and reconstructing things later. So I thought, well, I'll jump in my bag and grab the spare GPS unit off my other camera body, and when I dug out the other camera body, I realized I'd brought the wrong spare camera body and didn't have the GPS unit. So my only working available GPS unit was an awful long ways away in Texas. After the FMG chase, we drove to Garden on BHP, nabbed a couple of trains there, and that resulted in the fact that we got all 4 of the Pilbara railroads on the same day. First time that's happened on any of our trips. On Thursday, August 17th, we decided to shoot the Solomon line, primarily between Avon and Bow, incredibly scenic section of the line. With only one train all morning on the Solomon line, we had plenty of time to shoot other things, and consequently there's a plethora of ants and crows and various other things. So it wasn't a very productive morning, but the afternoon made up for it as a train about every hour. And you have bankers that run up to the top of the hill in the middle of that section. So you have the bankers running back and forth, which gives you some extra moves to shoot. And on the northbound loads gives you engines on both ends, which is kind of nice. So a very productive afternoon on the Solomon line. On Friday, August 18th, we decided to shoot Roy Hill, so we got up at 5 a.m. and rolled east. Immediately ran across a Rio Tinto train loading at the Gouda Dairy Mine. So shot that and then headed for Roy Hill. And when we got to the closest you can get to the mine, they ran a southbound empty in. So we crossed our fingers and hoped that would meet a northbound load. And sure enough, 20 minutes later, out rolled the load. And that resulted in a really great chase on Roy Hill first thing in the morning. And the area from the mine up to the top of the hill is a really great area to chase. It's a pusher grade, so you have head-end power, a DPU unit in the middle, and then bankers on the rear. And that gives you a lot better photo opportunities as you're chasing the train north. And then we managed an FMG shot on the way home near Morgan as we were headed back to another date with dinner at Auski Roadhouse. As you can see on the map, Auski Roadhouse is ideally situated in the middle of a bunch of action on the railroads in the Pilbara. So it's a pretty ideal place to make a base of operations, and it's one of the only places where there are any accommodations anywhere in that part of the world. So always a good location to base yourself out of. So consequently on this trip, we based ourselves there for 5 full days with 4 different railroads to shoot and wanting to get out to the ends of things. Every night as we drove back to Auski, you can see the lights of Auski from miles and miles away. It's like a beacon in the night calling you home. It's a wonderful place, small place, not much there, gas station, an eatery, a place to stay, and some support houses, but very small community. We're talking a handful of acres out in the middle of the outback, nothing else for miles and miles around. So when you see the lights, you know it's Auski, and every night as we roll in, dinner's waiting, and they have a barramundi there, sea bass, that is exceptionally good, and I think I ate barramundi almost every night while we were in Auski on this trip, not unlike the last trip. Saturday, August 19th, we opted for BHP, and continuing our out to the ends mantra for the trip, we drove down to Yandy Junction where the 2 main routes come together, and decided we would head south and west and follow the line that leads to Yandy 1 and Yandy 2 mines. And that turned out to be a spectacular area. A lot of really good shots and heavy action. BHP is pretty spectacular operationally. They leave the two mines and run upgrade, so they run slow. And you can chase them all the way back up to Yandy Junction and nab them easily 6 or 7, 8 times. So very good area for chasing. So we headed up the grade towards Garden, had lunch at Cowra, and caught a couple of trains at Cowra, and the second one was just a monstrously cool train, running slow, pulling hard, and just a gigantuan train, as all of BHPs are. Pretty spectacular. The train took almost 8 minutes to pass us. It had 41,608 tons on 270 loads. It's unbelievable railroading in the Pilbara. And there's really nothing like standing there and watching one of those go by. And again, we grabbed a Rio Tinto train near Auski at sunset, finishing out the day. A very productive day. Sunday, August 20th, was our last full day at Auski Roadhouse, so we decided to explore the Eliwana extension of FMG. So we drove to the Solomon Hub, got there shortly after daylight, caught an empty coming in right off the bat, and there was a train there loading, so we decided to stick with that for a little while. So as we chased east, as we approached Rio Tinto's Dairy extension, we could see a northbound in the distance. We jumped north, swung around to a siding at Casa, and caught the northbound, so that was a little bit of a bonus. And then we worked our way back to the Solomon Hub and then drove west down the Eliwana extension. And we don't have a lot to show for it. The scenery is pretty flat and pretty plain in that part of the railroad. So, but what we did do was we drove through a whole bunch of tar. They literally were tarring the road, the gravel road, and it slung tar all over our rental car. When we later turned the rental car in, the rental car folks weren't too happy about tar all over the car. Then we worked our way back and we ate lunch at a really pretty reverse S-curve overlook, not real far from the Solomon Hub, maybe 4 or 5 kilometers west of the Solomon Hub. And so we ate lunch, and I got done with lunch pretty quick, and Lon and Mel were still nibbling away, and I got that sixth sense that happens in the rail fanning world, where I just knew something was happening. I better get up to the top of the hill where I wanted to get the full reverse S, because you couldn't drive to that spot. So I hiked up the hill, maybe 200 or 300 yards from where we'd eaten lunch. And just about the time I got up there, I could hear a train pulling way off in the distance. And before long, here it came, and that turned out to be the shot of the day. Then spent the afternoon in that same really pretty area between Avon and Bow. And so with northbound 128 at 5:08 in the evening, we finished the Auski Roadhouse portion of our trip, drove back to Auski, shot some sunset shots on Rio Tinto from the bridge, just a short distance from Auski. And though 5 days might sound like a lot, at Auski Roadhouse it goes by in a flash. And we were very quickly moving on to the next portion of our trip, which was going to be to go to Newman. Many of you might have noticed I have a companion on these trips to the woods to do the narration. This is Phoebe. She's been with us 5 or 6 years, and she loves to chase the four-wheeler, her favorite thing in the world. Anyway, thanks for watching.